we're really happy right now to have Jessica Halliday on to continue our sponsorship talk. And Jess is going to talk a little bit about influencers and dealing with media and various components like that. So I'd like to welcome Jessica Halliday from Destination Toronto. And Jessica, if you can tell everybody a bit about yourself, and welcome to FEO Energize conference.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. I'm so happy to be here today, and thank you all for taking the time to chat with me. Today, I'm just going to kind of chat with you a little bit about media relations, the recent shift we've seen from a traditional and earned media relations perspective into influencer relations, bloggers, and that whole world. I think people are sometimes, struggle a little bit and what works best for them. So I'm just going to chat with you a little bit about that. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Just give me one moment. Oh, sorry, just give me one moment, please. Okay, great. Can everyone see the presentation right now? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I will get started then. Hi to everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jessica Halliday. I'm the Media Relations Manager at Destination Toronto. Just to give you a little bit of background information on me, I've been with Destination Toronto for about 7 years now, all in the media relations departments in varying degrees. In the past, I managed the international markets, which Toronto was present in 6 different international countries. This year, obviously due to COVID, we've limited our activity in international markets. We are still in a few, so I'm still managing those, but I've also taken on US media as well. So I kind of have a vast variety of backgrounds in different countries, different types of media to work with, and how each of those differ from one another. But I will dive right in now. So as we all know, the impact of COVID-19 has been detrimental on our hospitality, events, and tourism industry. And now more than ever, we need to get our names back into the conversations. We need to attract consumers back to our businesses, our destinations, have them seeing our products again, whatever it may be. Media relations is an impactful and, of course, cost-effective way to do this. We live in a world where media relations and marketing were 2 completely different concepts. We didn't intertwine them. People like to keep them very separate. But in today's day and age, with ever-changing trends, constant technological upgrades, new platforms, new social media accounts, you name it, it makes it almost impossible and honestly quite unfavorable not to integrate the 2 with each other. It's no longer marketing is what we say versus PR is what they say. These 2 go hand in hand with each other. And it's also super important to remember that you want your messaging to be cohesive as well. You want everything to align. You want your marketing and your PR to go together. And that's kind of where this influencer relations, digital marketing relations kind of comes into effect, and how the 2 are so intertwined now. I mean, it can be difficult to distinguish traditional media relations from influencer relations without knowing exactly what you're talking about. The 2 seem similar in a few ways. Both promote a brand, make connections with outlets that translates information, and the goal of both is to grow your businesses, to reach your target audiences, and to increase your loyalty and credibility to your consumers. A digital marketing influencer partnership obviously has its benefits. You have messaging control, there's guaranteed coverage, but then you get your inevitable sponsored by or paid partnership on the post or the content with the brand mention. So I'm just kind of going to get into a little bit later whether this affects audience members. Do you think it defers people? So I'll talk a little bit about that. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the shift from traditional media relations to influencers and bloggers, why both are still relevant and important. I think people have a big concept with influencers being the way of public relations and media relations and marketing now, but I think it's important to note that earned media relations is still very relevant. It's still very important. It has a huge impact, and it's not something that you should be just tossing away for influencers. I'll touch on different types of media outlets and most importantly, how to choose the right fit for you, your business, your product, whatever it may be. And this will of course vary from person to person. So first I'll dive into what earned media is. So before we get into the best media relations practices for you, I just want to talk a little bit about earned media versus pay-to-play options. So for those of you that don't know, earned media, which is a more traditional route, as us in the business like to say, it means the journalist or the media outlet is not being paid by a business to cover a feature. This, of course, means the coverage is not guaranteed and you can't control the narrative or have any final say in what is being published. If you build big enough relationships with certain media outlets, that's a little bit different, but you never have final approvals or anything like that. If you have a good relationship with say the Toronto Star or someone like that, they're likely not going to post something you don't want them to, but you don't have that final approval. This typically comes from a traditional pitch of a story or a press release, or in the case of destinations, often a press trip that shows off your city or province. Obviously the pro being is that it's free. You don't have to pay for this coverage. You are pitching out your story, your product, whatever it may be, to these audience, and to these outlets, and if they choose to pick it up and to feature it, then great, and it costs you nothing. Also, traditional media are a trusted source of news and information. It gives your coverage a bit of a sense of credibility. Like, I didn't pay this person to say this about me. They genuinely feel this way about me. And it often also creates a vast exposure across consumer households. It means you're reaching a large audience at no cost, which I mean, no one can complain about, of course. Now, the downside being that the coverage is in the hands of your media rather than yourself. As I said before, you have very limited control over the narrative that's being said, or if it even gets published. You could spend hours putting these pitches together, reaching out to your media contacts, and even if they do respond, you may get a little bit of attraction about it. It doesn't guarantee any coverage or where that coverage will be or when it gets posted. So earned media is typically more common in digital and print media, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used with influencers and broadcast outlets as well. I've had opportunities where I've done a normal traditional pitch to an influencer or a broadcast outlet and still gotten that coverage without paying for it. However, a pay-to-play is a much more common concept with the two options of influencer and broadcast, more so for influencers due to the fact that they aren't working for necessarily an outlet, so their main source of income is this pay-to-play option. So I'll chat with you a little bit about pay-to-play here. It's a newer concept even to Destination Toronto. We're kind of moving in the direction we've seen right before COVID that was kind of where we were going, and now that we're opening back up and we're seeing a lot of people wanting to visit again, we're going back down that pay-to-play route. So with the influx of influencers and bloggers and the impact they have on their followers, paid influencer relations has become a much more common concept in the media relations world. It means because you're paying for the coverage of your business, destination, product, or whatever it may be that you're promoting, you will have final approvals, you'll have more control over the narrative. And most importantly, all your work isn't going to go unnoticed. You have guaranteed coverage with impact reports, which I will chat with you a little bit later on. But of course, with all pros, there are cons. Paid influencer relations comes with a paid partnership tag or a sponsored post tag on the content that the influencer or blogger you're working with is promoting. I mean, people fear this will lessen the impact of the content. Saying someone paid for something, you're like, oh, this person doesn't actually feel this way about this product, so why would I listen to it? So with this being so, but I think this actually isn't true. I don't think that people are lessened or that doesn't detriment their opinion on the post or the content with this post. One, because it's so common these days, people are used to seeing that paid partnership, that sponsored post on their content. It shouldn't lessen your effect, the effect on your campaign too much because of this. Now, this is where picking your influencer and your audiences is super important, because with this method, the influencer is still the one actually creating the context. It's in their voice, it's on their platform, so it still resonates with their audience members. With marketing, you're the one creating the destination, or the business or the product is the one creating the content, the copy, the messages, and so it's very much so not in the voice of the influencer that you are working with. But with media relations side, they're still creating it in their voice. You just have final approval. So it's going to resonate with their audience because it's coming from a person that they trust, that they believe is only promoting things that they like, which of course is better for you. So both are kind of fantastic options for media relations, but they're typically most effective and cost effective when they're used in combination with each other. So I'm going to kind of go back to how you choose the right option for you and your business. So if you wanted to go the earned media route, this means you are not paying for the content, you are putting together pitches, and you are pitching traditional outlets. So with so many platforms, so many media person out there, how do you know what the most effective strategy is for you? With the limited budget, earned media is that way to go. The first step with the traditional media route is making sure you have a strong media list. Quality is greater than quantity when it comes to who you build relationships with. This is something that we have felt very strongly about within the last 5 years. We're no longer judging our media relations activity off of ad value and how many stories we got, but who is posting those stories, who is featuring us, who is covering us. Because if you have an impactful media outlet covering you, you have 2 large impactful media outlets that resonate with your audience, then you're going to have a bigger effect than if you have 100 stories in these outlets that are completely irrelevant for you. So building that media list is huge. Building those relationships with those reporters, those journalists who are in your category, ours being travel at Destination Toronto, is also big, because when you send them that pitch, but you've already worked with them and you have a good relationship with them, they're likely going to cover it. It's like I said, where you want to be seen, whose audience you want to resonate with. In order for your story to be effective, you need to make sure it's being seen by the right eyes. There are many public relations monitoring services out there that can help keep you up to date on this. If you're serious about your media relations activity and building your media list and pitching and keeping track of those conversations and that communication and building that relationship, I highly recommend having some sort of PR monitoring service. It'll make a big difference, especially with the turnaround in the industry right now. And then once you have your list, it's time to pitch. So what are the best practices to get your pitch noticed? Obviously, journalists are receiving hundreds of pitches a day. Their time is limited. Everyone has a very short attention span these days. So you want to make sure your pitch is short and impactful. You want to make sure it's straightforward, it's to the point, next steps are clear, offer interviews if they're available, all in that initial. Bullet points are always great. Don't be sending big, long paragraphs that I promise you, a journalist is not going to read it. I've had many failed attempts and learned over the years. So if you get straight to the point, if you have a good pitch and it has all the details, it's straight to the point and it's short, you're likely, and it sits well with the person you're pitching, you're likely going to get some coverage. Again, back to the media list, customize that media list. Ensure the people you are pitching are relevant to what you offer. By this, I don't mean send a destination story to someone who covers movie critics. Don't reach out I mean, typically, this is just a little advice from me. For broadcast, I'll typically go to the talent or the reporter rather than the editor and get them to pitch their editor, because they're the ones that are actually presenting it. They're the ones if it fits with them and what they're doing. So just little things like that. Make sure you know who you're pitching and customizing that list. Use first names. Don't do blanket pitches for the bigger outlets. Make it personal. So that leads me into my next bit of advice would be to do your research. Including an example of a story that a journalist has written about in the past that would make the pitch relevant for them to cover is always a great way to get their attention. That's kind of one of my tricks. You know, I saw you did a story on Ottawa about their food scene. I think this would be a great choice to do in Toronto, that kind of thing. Just make sure you're using, yeah, like I said, keep it personal. Make sure it's their first name. Make sure they know that you're specifically pitching to them, and you'll likely get a response as well. So as I stated before, traditional pitches can be used for digital, they can be used for print, but as well as broadcast and influencers. I have had success with influencers just pitching and providing a product rather than an actual the cost for their time. So I invited them to Toronto to experience the city for the day, and they covered it. So the cost was just the exchange of the trip and the stuff they were doing. So it is possible to do influencer marketing or public relations without paying them. It's just kind of not as common or likely. But today, like I said, unfortunately, but influencers typically come at a cost, and I'll kind of dive into it. Because you're paying for something, you want to make sure you're getting the right person to do the job for you. So I'll kind of dive into how to find the right influencer for you. So first and foremost, one of the most important things you will need to consider is the type of influencer that you want to work with. There are kind of 4 types that are typically stated when you're to bring into a campaign. You have your mega, your macro, your micro, and your nano. These will strongly be dictated by your budget. Obviously, your larger influencers are going to cost you more money. Each differ with reach, cost, associated brand loyalty, and level of trust by followers. But this is, don't be alarmed if you can't afford like a mega or a macro influencers with millions or hundreds of thousands of followers. Because I think this is where people get a little bit confused. There's a lot more to picking the right influencer for you than a follower count. I think people look at follower counts, and that dictates most of what they're doing. They see 1 million followers and they're like, perfect, I'm going to reach 1 million people, and these people are going to love my business, my product, my destination. But in my experience, and typically audience engagement and loyalty can actually be stronger when you're using the smaller side of the influencer world. So if you don't have a huge budget to use or anything like that, you can still do this. You can still, you can get a TikTok video. I've gotten a TikTok video, a reel on Instagram, and then a series of 5 stories for just a couple $1,000s. So you just have to make sure you're finding what works for you. So I'm going to just kind of, before I get into the things to consider when picking your influencers, I'm just going to share a video that I actually did it was a paid influencer program for a campaign we did back in February. However, this cost me under $3,000. This was one of 3 videos plus stories. And this girl just had a strong Toronto following. We were looking for date night, younger audience, and it just fit well. She only had about, I believe it was 17,000 followers on TikTok at the time, but her engagement rate was 11%. So, which the industry average, for those of you that don't know, is about 2 to 3%. That's like a good engagement rate. So you kind of look at that. Her followers are really, they're watching her videos. They're actually taking what she says into consideration. They trust her. They're loyal to her. They're commenting. They're chatting, which can be more effective than just a pair of eyes on your video. So I'm just going to go ahead and share that with you right now. Oh, share.
Jessica, I think we're having a problem out here. We can't hear the
Can't hear it? Okay,
sometimes Zoom does that depending on your playbacks and stuff like that. So unfortunately, we saw the video, but we weren't able to hear it.
Okay, my apologies. I'm so sorry. I'll just go back to the presentation then. Basically, it's just a roundup. She was doing a roundup of date night ideas in Toronto. But I just kind of wanted to give you an example of a small influencer that maybe isn't as refined and professional as some of the very large ones who are well established. She was just starting out. I just kind of wanted to show off that the impact from that. We had like restaurants telling us that like the people saw it on her TikTok, so they joined and went there. So it's just kind of an example of how it doesn't need to be a massive following to still have an impact.
Jessica, can you share her name so people can go and look it up if they want?
Yeah, absolutely. Her name is, can I send in the chat right after? I have a couple that I won't obviously show you them all because they're not working. But I can I'll right after this, I'll send in the chat there, their handles for each of the people we used for this.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so are you back on my presentation now then?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So picking the right influencer for you. This is obviously your biggest challenge. This is where you're going to kind of get your full strategy is going to kind of come together. So like I said, these influencers didn't necessarily have the largest of followings, but their audience fit well with our message. Their follower engagement was huge with their posts, and you could tell their audience, with their followers, they're loyal to them. They trust what these people are saying, even though it has that paid sponsorship post. They know that these people aren't, because they're smaller, because they have they're interacting with them, they know that these people are not actually just promoting stuff because they're being paid to. They're promoting it because they genuinely care or feel strongly about the product, place, business that they're promoting. So a few important things to consider when you are choosing who you will work with. So where do you want your content to live? There is so many different platforms, and I feel like there's just stuff coming out every day. But do you want your content to live on Facebook? Do you want it to live on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok? All of them, only a couple of them? This is the first thing you need to consider, because you need to make sure that the influencer that you work with works well on the platform you want to feature content on. You may have a TikTok influencer that is huge on TikTok. They have a massive following. Things are great. But you want your Instagram to live on, you want your content to live on Instagram, and their Instagram maybe isn't as strong. Maybe their following is more personal on Instagram and they don't have that professional following. So those are some, you really need to do your research in that sense. Make sure, do you want videos? Make sure they're comfortable doing a video and not just posting a picture. If you want a reel, make sure they have the ability to create a reel. If you're just looking for a static post, do they have the assets? Do they have the content that they need from you to post that? So just make sure what you want is relevant with what they are able to do. The next thing you should consider is who their audience is. I've touched on this a bit. Is your campaign or product going to resonate with their followers? So you want to identify who is most likely to move the needle for your business or product. Who should you be engaging with on this campaign? Like I said before, you could land a piece in, I don't know, the Wall Street Journal, which is obviously impactful. But if you're talking about something that is completely irrelevant to a Wall Street Journal audience, is it actually influencing anyone? Is it actually making an impact? Is it actually going to have any ROI? So it's stuff like that you need to consider. Are all their followers engaged? Are they loyal? So be sure to not only look at the follower amount, like I said, but their engagement rates. If their engagement rate is over 2 to 3%, that's considered a very good engagement rate. I know it sounds small, but that's our world. And engagement rates mean, are people not just eyes on them, because obviously that is important too, but are they liking the product? Are they commenting? Are they engaging? Are they asking questions? Are they sharing it? Are they saving it? That sort of thing. It's not just, oh, I saw that you posted that, and not actually really taking in what the post says. It's, are they actually, are they going to take what you are saying and go to that restaurant? Are they going to go buy that product? So that's something that's super important now. You will see with some nano and micro, like I said, have, you know, 10, 11% engagement rates. This can, I mean, it depends on your business's needs, but this can be more important than, you know, she could have 5,000 followers, but if she has an 11% engagement rate, that's 4 times the normal amount that's considered good. So if that's more important to you, then go that route. And so kind of the next steps you'll be taking. So say you've gone through all this, you've found an influencer or a blogger that has an audience that resonates with your audience, their followers are engaged, they are performing on the outlets you want to, like what is the next steps? How do you go about creating this relationship and building a campaign plan? So number one thing, make sure your expectations are clear. Create an influencer briefing document. This is my first step whenever I'm doing anything. So in this, I make sure what I expect of them. So how many posts they're making, where they're putting them, how often, the timing of them, the key messages, the assets that will be included, the messages you want to portray, everything like that. Make sure it's in that influencer briefing document. Because like I said, it's not a marketing campaign. You're still doing PR. So there still is a little bit of room for not having complete control over the narrative. So just make sure that's all documented in an influencer briefing document. Make sure you're both on the same page. They understand what's expected of them. You understand what's expected of you. Now, that leads into my next thing. Ensure you have a signed contract, noting the expectations of both parties. So make sure in that, whether you sign the briefing document, whether you create a separate contract, just make sure everything is outlined. They know what they're doing for you. You know what you're paying them. You know what you're providing them. You know when these posts will go live. Also, you make sure, I will get to this, but make sure you include in this contract a coverage report. So make sure they provide you in a timely manner a report of how the content did on their platform. So how many people saw it, how many people engaged with it, if they'll be resharing it, that sort of thing. So make sure you get a full coverage report after, because I mean, it's great, obviously, that like people are seeing your product and business, but if you can't show what it did, then you don't have any impact of the money that you spent. So just make sure that's all in the contract as well, and make sure you both sign it. Next would be providing access to assets, any brand guidelines you may have. Because you are paying for this, you have a little more control over that. So you can provide assets, whether it be photos, videos, whatever you like. You can provide copy to them. I typically like to steer away from providing copy. I'll give them key messages, I'll give them brand guidelines, but I like to stay away from actually giving them specific copy, because you want this to be, it's still public relations, it's still media relations. It has a bigger impact when it's in their voice and it's cohesive with the rest of their content. So it doesn't look out of place. And when it looks out of place, it seems more paid, which is where you'll kind of lose that interest. So yeah, just provide access to assets and brand guidelines, and then make sure you receive a coverage report after, which you would have in your contract. So you got it. And so choosing, like I'm just gonna kind of wrap this up here a little bit and give you a little words of wisdom, I guess, if you will. So choosing what strategy works best for you can be challenging, but having definitive goals and KPIs is the first step to determining what the best fit for you is, whether it be earned media relations or paid influencer media relations, and how to choose what media outlets you want to chat with or be present in. If resources allow, a combination of both earned media relations and paid influencer relations is the most effective way to make an impact on your customers. You get the both, so you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to have a control over a narrative. You're going to have guaranteed coverage with your paid side, but with your traditional, like we said, it has a sense of credibility. It has a sense of loyalty from their and it's not going to cost you anything, which is amazing. So the thing with media relations is that there's no definitive right or wrong answer, or one option fits all when you're creating your campaign strategy. So just make sure you do your research, you know what you want to achieve, and you consider the best way to showcase that using the media outlets and the influencers. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions or anything like that you may have.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Some great information there. I'm slipping here. Yeah, I wrote down a couple of points.
Yeah, for sure.
You talked about your contacts at your paid media outlets, and it's so important. Jay and I both worked. I worked for CTV and ran the promotion department, and Jay worked in radio, so we know head on what's out there. But you know, a lot of people they always say, "How come you're not going to our events?" Well, 9 times out of 10, it's because the people didn't tell us about it. Number one,
right.
And like you said, you know, you get thousands of requests a week to go out to different things. So,
yeah.
You know, that press release is so important. And we talked about having contacts at media outlets, whether they're journalists. You have to be careful with your salespeople and your news people because they're sort of a church and state. That being said, if you've got a paid campaign with a media outlet, your news division doesn't always know that, and it doesn't hurt to have it mentioned now and then. The other thing you talked about is with that pay and play is, you know, as a not-for-profit, when you're buying time, you get a much better rate, and you can really spread that out over a good run.
Right.
Some other things, you know, sometimes getting you know, if it's news coverage from a TV station or, you know, community like a Rogers or whatever, your press release is important because if it's important to you to have a camera and a journalist at your event for your sponsors to see and stuff like that, you don't want to give everything away in your press release.
No.
And you want to have a reason for them to come, right? Can you speak to that?
Little teaser typically, right? You want to make sure you give them a reason to get there without giving it all away, so they don't have
and
to
in
go.
some cases, if it's television or video coverage you're interested in, you want to have a visual impact for them to come. Otherwise, they can just read the copy and, you know, they've sort of met their requirements. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know much, or do you deal much with people that are selling like the specialty channel programs? So I'm thinking like the TSN, the Sportsnets, the CNN. You always see the different local commercials in there, and that's a really good buy for niche markets. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, yeah. So I think that goes hand in hand with that audience, making sure your audience resonates with their audience. We actually recently did a show. This is very different than what we have ever done in the past, but we recently had Amazon reach out and kind of to do, and it's a very niche show, but it was a Greater Canada travel story. So that they wanted to, you know, they wanted to feature Toronto, which is not typically something we would do, but because the market was so niche, their audience was so relevant to ours, it was worth the investment. So if you're, you know, if you were looking, like you said, TSN or something like that, maybe the cost is a little higher, but if your impact on that audience, if it resonates, like I said, it's quantity over quality. So you're going to resonate so much more with that audience. They're going to take what you're saying because they care about what you're showing off. Is that kind of what you're looking at? Is that, yeah. So exactly. It's just, it's really like a big thing. And like, it's just something, full disclosure with Destination Journal. We moved, like it used to be quantity, like how many stories can we get? How high can that add value get, kind of thing. And when we made the shift to quality and creating a top list and getting features in that top list, our impact and our, you know, it was crazy, the difference we saw. Like it was such a smaller number, but the ROI was so much bigger because it was relevant.
And just a question, when you talked about influencer engagement and the percentages, like 2% is a good. Yeah. And what is that engagement like? Is that a call to action from the influencers and somebody's gone and looked into it, or what constitutes that engagement and that percentage?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually a little bit different. I'll talk a little bit actually about that as well. That kind of clicked too. I'll go into that after. I'll answer your first question first. Engagement is a like, a share, or a comment. So it's not just looking at a post or a whatever it may be, or not just looking at content. They're actually, so if you're reading an article, you stay on the page for a certain amount of time, you're sharing the article, that sort of thing. If it's on social media, maybe you saved it, maybe you sent it to a friend, maybe you actually comment on it, you liked it. It's more than just looking and moving on from the content. And then, okay, yeah. Sorry, no, I was just gonna, no, that's okay. And then for the call to action thing, that's actually something hopefully I can maybe provide some insight on in a month or so. It's something we're kind of working through. How do you measure that, right? How do you measure if this is actually going to have, if people are going to your website or going and looking at your product or whatever it may be, buying your product from seeing this thing on social media. So it's something that we're kind of working through. The swipe up links really help. If you're able to have someone who does the swipe up links, you can see how many people are swiping up from that, obviously. But sometimes, like a post, like what if I saw a post that was of, oh, this amazing festival I want to go to, I'm going to do that, but I didn't like or commented, but I still saw it there and went to it, right? You know what I mean? So it's something that we're kind of working through at Destiny. We're trying to come up with a formula and a strategy and how to better measure the impact or the ROI on social media posts. It's very, or public relations outside of the ad value. It's a very tricky subject, and it's kind of something I think we're all learning together.
And when you're doing your wrap-up report for your sponsors or your influencers, how do you use the metrics to tell your story? Because I mean, you can spin them so many different ways.
You can spin that's exactly it. For our traditional and our earned media, it's that top list. That's what we use. We create a top list at the beginning of each year for each of our markets. So every geography that we have invested in, we create a top list of media outlets that we want to secure coverage in. And it's kind of like a check thing. Make sure, that we've pitched it, that we've created this content, that they feature. So from the earned side, that's how we measure it. The social side and the influencer side, again, is a little more difficult. And this is something that right now I would say is a case-to-case basis. Going into the last campaign that I did with paid influencers, I created what I wanted to see out of that and then gave them the metrics to measure in that contract. So I said, these are the measurements, this is the metrics that I require from you, these are the metrics you need to meet in order for this to be a successful campaign. So how many people commented on your post, how many people liked it, how many people shared it, how many people saw it. And it's kind of right now, that's the method we're going through. Unless it has that click through, then it's obviously just how many people clicked on that product and went to the website or the page for whatever it took you to.
And again, your messaging is so important, and sort of going back again to my television days, I remember working with some events and some BIAs, and, after the event, you'd follow up and say, well, how did it work out? Did it? And sometimes the responses back were quite interesting. It's, well, we had people lined up outside of our store. But we didn't sell much. Well, the campaign was meant to bring people to your store.
There. I can't do anything.
It's your job to sell, right? So it's defining all those things along the way with your partners.
That's also it, to be like that open, clear communication, I think is like the biggest thing, is make sure you both know what's expected of you. Like that is honestly the number one advice I give, because you have a lot of things too. Like I thought you were going to give me this, or I was going to get this out of this. You know what I mean? There's a lot of back and forth. So I think clearly outlining with a paid, obviously, if you're paying for something, clearly outlining the expectations and having that signed contract, because we've had it's such a new world, right? So you never know, people can kind of get away with a little bit more. So I always like to just make sure you have something in writing. It's been a difficult couple of years for everybody. We all know that. What's it been like for Destination Ontario coming out of the last 2 years and sort of everybody hitting everybody at once, to do something? I wish I could tell you how busy the last 2 months have been. I think this is like, since the day I started, this might be the busiest I've ever been. It's just because we were, obviously Toronto they had the most conservative lockdowns. We had a rough go the last couple of years, and we had campaigns that just got postponed over and over and over again. And now it's like the floodgates have opened, which is amazing, and it makes me very happy, and I'm very happy about this. But it's kind of a big part of our strategies, especially over COVID, were media relations, because it was insensitive to market it, right? For us to sit there and say, come to Toronto when there's so much else going on in the world. And we've kind of hung on to that. And, even after COVID, we expanded our marketing is back in full swing. And they, our media relations budgets are expanding. We're seeing the impact it's having. And now we are seeing, like, especially, I wasn't sure if journalists were going to be ready to travel again right away. They are. Everyone's excited. Everyone wants to come to Canada. We're back. So it's good. I haven't seen this much interest and this much kind of like people really ready to travel and ready to get out and do stuff in the world again. So it's great. It makes me very happy, but very busy.
Now, with how do you guys work it? Like, there can be too much messaging to your audiences, right? Like, do you have a certain amount of promotions you'll run at one time, or how do you stage that, and what's the balance?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you mean between public relations and marketing, or
Just event based? So you're working with a couple of restaurants, or you're working on a culinary element.
Yeah.
How do you, like, I know we run it here at FEO. We're always in a conundrum. Are we sending out too much stuff?
Right.
Are we becoming irrelevant because we're just bombarding? We kind of make a conscious decision that, yeah, this is going to affect a lot of people. It's important information. It needs to be sent. Something else might come out that it'd be kind of a nice to have, but we've already sent out 5 messages this week.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that the turning point? How do you guys judge that?
Yeah, so we actually, that's something that also, again, like we used to say, we had so many, we were a little bit siloed between our business, because we have a business events, we have a brand content, we have a public relations, we have a marketing team, and we were a little bit siloed up until fairly recently, I would say, in that we're all sending out different things about the same things too. And so I think one big thing is to make sure your whole company is cohesive, and make sure you're not sending out this, like you're not doubling labor. So I'm not writing an article, or I've written something exciting news has come up with a restaurant, and we don't have 4 different people sending this out to 4 different audiences that overlap. So just one thing is make sure you're all cohesive. In terms of how much to send, the ever challenging concept. I think if it's a big enough message, like you said, you're going to send it regardless. But those smaller things, like I don't think, like, we send a newsletter once every 3 weeks. We have 3 different newsletters. We have a business events one, we have a Terminal 6 one, and we have an internal one. I only see each of those once a month. And it's kind of based on what you want to do. You see your click rates go down as you send out more and more and more. If you're sending out 5 different things, I know it's a little different if your messaging isn't about leisure. A lot of ours is leisure based, so we can have a little bit more leeway in terms of when we send stuff. If you have an important message, send it. Don't worry about timing. But I think you do need to make sure you are analyzing what you're sending out, and you're not bombarding these people. They're going to stop opening it. I'll tell you, if you're sending 4 newsletters a week, 3. If you're sending 2 newsletters a week, they're not opening it, right? So I think it's stuff like that. You're sending a weekly newsletter, you're fine. You're likely still going to get people engaged if you have enough information to send. I think it's just being very conscious about what you're sending. Is this message important? Is it relevant? Do people want to hear it? Is this something we need to share? Just make sure you're asking those questions. And if all those answers are yes, I wouldn't worry about how much you sent it.
And it's easy to get into the influencer and blogger world to get everybody sort of doing it, but somebody has to champion it, right? You have to have an overall vision, otherwise you're just confusing everybody. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we have a overarching editorial calendar that our entire company, no matter what department you're in, kind of follows. So we have like a monthly, almost like a theme, I guess, if you will, quarterly of what we're focusing on in that. So that's typically how I choose my influencer marketing campaigns. If I have a story that I'd like to tell right now, a big one is wellness, sustainability, travel with a purpose, that kind of thing. So if I have that story to tell, I'll find the timeline that it fits in with our greater editorial calendar. So Destination Toronto's entire company's message is cohesive. Then I will find an influencer that fits that, the lifestyle, the wellness, but as well as the kind of travel side. I'll find someone that fits in that and make sure it's going into that. So blocking out an editorial calendar is a big thing, I find. And then bringing, so you're not trying to fit a square into a circle peg kind of thing, right? So you just make sure that you're actually having an overall impact. It's not just a one-off influence. It happens, but it's part of a bigger story, I guess is what I'm getting at, if that makes sense. Just make sure your influencer isn't just a one-off story that's relevant for 2 weeks. It makes it more green when it's attached to a greater editorial calendar.
And I like that idea of the editorial calendar. And it makes a lot of sense because, a lot of people are great at marketing and communicating about their festival for the 1 month period that it happens in, and then they sort of disappear. for
Yeah.
11 months of the year and they're gone.
Exactly.
Their
Yeah.
social presence is gone and everything. So, I mean, there's lots of ways to watch what your sponsor doing, congratulate on awards, you know, watch what your volunteers are doing, you know,
Yeah.
highlight them in your, it's easy to create a calendar throughout a year to keep that engagement and get your name out in front of people.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you a way too. It maybe have a lull in the year. It kind of gives you a little bit of a, you know, sparks an idea. Okay, let's focus on this. You know, we are one of, I mean, with like big ticket items or something like that. Oh, like we maybe don't have a lot going on right now, but that's kind of our theme, and that's where the rest of the company is focusing on. Let's see if we can get an influencer. Let's do a pitch to fit with that, and it seems relevant, right? It's not just coming out of left field either, because it's a greater editorial theme.
And when you're looking at influencers and bloggers, like how are you finding them? Are you just searching the platforms and looking for numbers, or is there a registry out there? Or?
Yes, there is. We are very lucky. I've stolen them from our marketing team. They have an agency that has created a list of influencers with engagement rates, followers, stuff like that, with a description of what they do. I personally, though, I research everyone I use on my own. I go through everything just to make sure that it's relevant. And maybe it's not necessarily an influencer that you think you would want to use. Maybe it's not like a travel one, but the girl I showed you earlier that you couldn't hear, sorry. She, you know, that typically wouldn't be it did come from the list from our marketing agency. I'll be completely transparent, but she typically wouldn't be probably a Destination Toronto influencer choice, just because of a small following, and she's a little more like Toronto lifestyle based. But because of the Bachelor campaign that we were doing it with, we wanted it to be more local focused. We wanted someone who resonated with Toronto audiences, a little bit of a younger, more female based audience, which was her. But there are, with that being said, if you don't have an agency or that luxury, there are databases, and most of them you do have to pay for, but you can find some cheaper ones. Right now, our media monitoring service we just switched doesn't have an influencer tracking, so that's why we are using our agency. But Cision, a lot of them have add-ons too, where you can get influencer lists. You give what you're looking for from your influencers, and you'll get a list, and you can kind of keep track of them in there as well. So there are services that provide that.
The other thing is when you get into niche marketing, and I'm going to use an example of a cycling race component of a festival. You know, drilling down into those demographics and knowing what else are cyclists interested in, you know? Yeah, they typically will spend a couple days in a location. A lot of them are foodies. So it really opens up a whole spectrum that, okay, here's a niche audience that I can offer some other niche elements to.
Absolutely. And you can kind of like, oh, like, you know, stuff that they might not know. This is me promoting Toronto Signal, but like, oh, I didn't know you have bike tours on the islands and stuff like that, right? You can you look into what else they're looking into too. And it's yeah, like you said, like they're obviously typically interested in health, wellness, kind of go that route too. You know, this seems niche, but then you kind of, what else are there? What else are those people interested in? What else do those people want to see? What else do these people want to do?
Now, if you're going down the influencer and blogger route, how long typically is the engagement process? Like from, oh, I found her, I've started the engagement, to locking it up?
I've done it very quickly, and I've done it properly. So
let's go properly.
Yes, this is Destination Toronto's kind of mandate, I guess, with any media request is 4 weeks, 4 weeks notice. I like to give even sometimes a little bit more, but I've done it in 2 weeks. I've done it in a week. So, but 4 weeks is like a typical, that gives you time to negotiate, to reach out, to make that initial contact, and for them to create contact, you to approve, and for them to post in a timely manner. But I have also done it in a week. I don't recommend that, though.
And I think, you know, this is sort of going back to Victoria in the last segment, and you know, we've probably had similar experiences, but that last minute agency reaching out that they want to be in front of a number of people, like I would always tell our people, make sure you save some space on site for these last minute activations.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time there's a lot of cash sitting there that they just want to be in front of.
And then they're like, people. What do I do? Yeah.
Right. And if you're jam-packed and you can't take it, I mean, a lot of times those campaigns are what put you over the top on your profit margins.
Absolutely. That is an amazing tip, actually. Yeah, that's great. Especially too, because yeah, some people hold on to that money because they're not really sure what's going to come up. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait a minute, I have to spend this. So those are always good resources to tap into.
We were talking in the last section about how do you value your sponsorship? Like, do you have a formula that, you know, this campaign is worth this much based on, like, how do you put a price on it? Are you?
It's tough, and that's,
yeah,
it is. It's very, and that's kind of, again, a big challenge that we are currently working through. A lot of people from our destination development, like multiple people working in on this, giving numbers of how do you measure this? Like it used to be ad value, but ad values come a little bit outdated right now. There's lots of different formulas. There's lots of different people who use different things. So that's kind of been a big challenge. I guess a learning experience from, I will tell from our last one, we had quite a bit of money put towards a campaign. We did learn some restrictions, and that's why it did go down, but we didn't end up using like nearly as much money, and we had to reforecast the money and stuff just because it didn't cost as much as we thought. And it's honestly like a trial and error and putting a value on, and that's why those coverage reports are so important. You kind of, as you do more and more influencer marketing, you're seeing what the value is, and it's kind of a trial and error and seeing what this leads up to. Right now, we are in the process of trying to create some sort of ad value type of formula of how to measure that. So TBD.
Yeah, and something that we've always worked on is you know, knowing what your true costs are, you know, cost benefit analysis and stuff like that. Like, you know, when I was running events, I wanted to make sure if it was a ticketed event that I covered my costs on ticket sales. I didn't want to rely on sponsors. Right. And so many people get into that conundrum of, oh, we're going to cover that with sponsorship sales. Then you're already into the event. You didn't make that sponsorship sale. Now you're losing money. So I think it's so important to do that break-even analysis up front, so that you know if it's a $10,000 event, then you want to have a 35% profit margin. Well, your campaign's going to be 35%.
This is how much, and that's exactly. That's exactly, and that's exactly what it is. Obviously, like, with when you're actually like making a certain amount of money and stuff, it's a little bit different. With us, we're not for profit, right? We're not taking any profit, so it makes it even more difficult, right? We don't have that like, oh, we made this much money off this. We're like, did people go to these restaurants? Like it's such a hard thing to tell, and that's why, you know, PR, I don't think it's ever going to change. I think that's just the nature of public relations and media relations, but I genuinely have had like restaurants reach out to me and tell me, like, after the fact of a press trip, being like, yeah, we had people tell us they saw this article and this, so they came here and stuff, and it's stuff we've done, but it's just, when you're not actually bringing in any sort of money, it's harder to measure, of course.
Yeah, and for people that don't think stuff like this, I mean, influencers, it goes way back. I mean, I'm thinking of newspapers that had food columnists, right, that go out and review restaurants. And
you listen to them.
A lot of those restaurants are packed after, good or bad. I mean,
they just want to go and see.
But try it for themselves. So we know it does work.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why that's why that engagement rate is really important with influencers. Just so, because that's the way you know that the followers they have are actually taking what they're saying into consideration. That's why I find that engagement rate more important than that follower number.
Well, Jessica, some great information. A last word that you'd want to share with anybody?
Oh, I mean, it's my media relations. It's a crazy world, but it's a fun one. It keeps you on your toes. It's always changing. I think the biggest thing is stay on top of trends. Public relations has become one of those things that, like, that's not relevant anymore 2 weeks later kind of thing. So just make sure you're doing your research too, and make sure the people you're working with are passionate about what they're saying too. Their audience members are going to know if they actually care about what they're talking about. That's a big thing. You know, make sure you're both on the same page, you both have the same expectations, and you both want to be doing what you're doing. So I think that's my final words.
Well, thank you very much. A lot of great information, Jessica. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to see you all.